She slept in the park every night, until a millionaire stepped in and uncovered something terrifying. She clutched a one-eyed teddy bear to her chest, its ears frayed and its neck stitched with red thread. The morning mist drifted between the trees of Eisenfurt Park, turning the scene into something suspended between a dream and a tragedy. Curled up on a cracked wooden bench, her dirty feet swung above the frozen ground as she hummed something barely audible. Strands of hair stuck to her face from the moisture, yet her eyes were wide open, not from sleep, but from waiting. A kind of waiting that hurt to look at. Henrik Voss stopped. Like someone stumbling into a forgotten memory, he stood frozen for a few seconds. His coffee still steamed in his travel mug, but his hand paused in mid-air. Every day, for almost 4 decades, he'd walked that same path, at the same time with the same stride. Nothing ever stopped him. Not meetings, not emergencies, not illness. But now, something in that corner of the park had cracked the thick glass of his armor. He tried to keep walking, took 3 steps, stopped. The music, that melody, the exact same tone, like it had been pulled straight from an old vinyl forgotten in the back of a drawer. It was the song his younger sister used to sing beside the piano before she vanished. She was 9 when she disappeared. No trace, no explanation. Henrik, 12 at the time, had spent his whole life trying not to think about it, until now. He turned toward the girl. She looked 7 or 8, way too thin. Her face hidden beneath the hood of a filthy sweatshirt, 2 sizes too big. Her eyes weren't asking for help. They were just waiting. When he stepped closer, she hugged the teddy bear tighter, still humming, still the same fragment of melody. Henrik knelt slowly, setting down his briefcase and coffee like they were explosives. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Are you alone?" She stopped humming. After a pause that hurt more than a no, she said, "My mom said she'd come back." Henrik felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. And as strange as it seemed, this wasn't just compassion. It was like a portal had opened inside him, unleashing a pain he'd kept, locked away for years. He looked around. No one seemed to notice. People rushed by, ignoring the girl like she was part of the scenery. And him, he who had always walked in a straight line, couldn't take another step. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were green, deep, and hauntingly familiar. "Ellie," she said, with a calm certainty that broke his heart. Henrik took a deep breath. Ellie. That name meant nothing. And everything. Like every syllable pushed a long-buried memory closer to the edge. He thought about calling social services, getting help, doing the responsible thing. But something held him back. It wasn't just pity. It was a connection, an instinct, a silent calling. "Can I bring you something? A blanket, maybe?" he offered. She shook her head. Then, almost like a secret, she whispered, "Mom said if I leave, she won't find me anymore." Henrik pulled back slightly. This was worse than he thought. A child waiting for days, maybe weeks, on the same bench for someone who wasn't coming back. But there was something else, something he still couldn't put into words, as if this girl knew a part of him that he himself had forgotten, as if this encounter wasn't random, but fate. And then, before he could ask anything, she did something that stopped him cold. She pulled a small golden pendant from her coat pocket, a tiny musical note, identical to the one his sister had worn on a necklace the day she disappeared. Henrik couldn't breathe, and in that moment, he knew. The answer to everything he'd never dared to ask began with that girl, but he didn't yet know the worst part. The city's noise felt distant, muffled not by silence, but by absence. Henrik stood before the girl, as if facing an open grave. The pendant still swung between her fingers, reflecting a pale, cold light. This wasn't a coincidence, it couldn't be. His sister's necklace had the exact same design. A musical note with engraved details, a gift from their mother before her last recital. The police never found it after the disappearance. And now, here it was, in the hands of a child hunched on a park bench. That morning, Henrik didn't go to the office. He drove home as if moving in slow motion. The car radio was off. His fingers clenched the steering wheel so tightly the knuckles turned white. He had a reputation to uphold, CEO of one of the largest environmental firms on the East Coast, magazine covers, keynote speaker at global conferences, but all of it now felt like a cheap disguise. At home, he went straight to the room where he kept the boxes of old photos. He hadn't opened them in years. The smell of aged paper hit him like a punch. With trembling hands, he flipped through the albums. And there she was. Anna Voss, 7 years old, blue dress, hair in 2 braids, the same necklace hanging from her neck. In the next photo, she sat at the piano staring straight at Henrik, not the look of a little sister to her brother, but something deeper, like a secret, like she knew more than she let on. Henrik remembered that last morning. It was a Tuesday, rainy. Their mother left early for work, their father as always locked away in his study. And Henrik, he stayed with Anna until school time, but that day she didn't want to go. She said she had a secret, said she'd run away that night. Henrik laughed, thought she was joking. When he came home from school, she was gone. No one saw her leave. No one ever saw her again. For years, Henrik believed she had been taken. But something in that memory, the tone of her voice, her quiet certainty, now with Ellie took on a different weight. The next day, he returned to the park. Ellie was in the same spot, same posture, as if time didn't pass for her. "Did you sleep here again?" he asked, trying not to sound alarmed. She nodded, eyes fixed somewhere deep in the bushes. "I brought breakfast. Pancakes and hot chocolate," he said, holding out the bag like a peace offering. She hesitated, but took it, and ate slowly as if she didn't want it to end. Henrik sat beside her, feeling the cold of the bench seep through his expensive suit. They sat in silence for a while. "That necklace, where did you get it?" Ellie waited. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "My mom gave it to me. Said it was important, said it was her sister's." Henrik didn't move. His heart was pounding. That didn't make sense. Ellie's mother would be his sister? But how? Where had she been? Why had she never come back? "What's your mom's name?" Ellie looked at him. Her eyes weren't afraid, but full of shadows. "She told me not to tell." The chill that ran down his spine was instant. This wasn't just a sad story of abandonment. It was something much deeper and far more dangerous. Henrik knew he couldn't push her, but he also knew he had to find out. For her and for himself. In the days that followed, he built a routine. He came early, brought food, sometimes clothes, children's books. Ellie accepted everything with quiet politeness, but kept her emotional distance. Still, something was growing between them. A quiet trust. A wordless bond. One rainy afternoon, when the park was empty, she said something that undid him. "You don't feel like a stranger." Henrik smiled, but didn't reply. "Sometimes I dream that I know you," she continued, "but in the dreams you're a kid, and you're always crying." He couldn't hold back the impact. Her words couldn't have been made up. It was as if someone had unlocked his most buried memory and placed it in the hands of a child. That night, Henrik made a decision. He would hire a private investigator. He needed to find Ellie's mother. He needed to understand how that necklace had ended up in her hands, but what he didn't know yet was that Ellie was hiding more than she seemed, and that this story didn't begin with his sister's disappearance. It began much earlier, and the next memory to resurface would change everything. That morning, the sky was covered in thick, almost violet clouds, and the air carried the sharp, metallic scent of oncoming rain. Henrik was already at the park before 6. He stared at the empty bench, feeling a kind of anxiety he couldn't explain. With each passing minute, the silence of the place became more deafening. She was never late, never. It was like she was part of the scenery, always there, still waiting. But today, the bench was empty. The teddy bear was gone. No sign of Ellie. Henrik walked in circles for 20 minutes. He asked the groundskeepers, the joggers, the park police. No one had seen a little girl that morning. Panic rose in his throat like a blade. That old sensation, buried for decades, returned in full helplessness. When Anna disappeared, it had been just like this. One moment of absence and suddenly a bottomless void. He grabbed his phone and called the private investigator he'd hired 2 days earlier. His name was Graham Riles, a former FBI agent who specialized in disappearances and cold cases. Henrik skipped the pleasantries. He told him to activate everything they had: camera footage, eyewitnesses, anything. He hung up and started combing the park again, searching between trees, under benches, asking about a child with an old teddy bear. And then, across the lake, he saw her. Ellie was sitting behind a flowering bush, holding the teddy bear tightly. Her eyes were puffy, but she wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. When he got close, she didn't react. "You scared me." "I thought you left," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She just looked at him, then whispered, "I did. But I came back." Henrik sat down beside her. He was tense, as if she could vanish at any moment. Something was different about her now, something darker, as if in just a few hours she had aged years. "Where did you go?" She didn't answer right away. Then with her head down she murmured, "I went to look for my mom. I thought she was nearby, but I didn't find her. I only saw a woman yelling at a boy, and I remembered why my mom left." Henrik swallowed hard. He wanted to ask more, but stopped himself. He knew if he pushed too hard, she'd shut down again. "Are you hungry?" he tried. She shook her head, then looked him in the eye and said something that made him freeze. "My mom told me, if I ever met someone with eyes as sad as mine, I could trust them." Henrik tried to smile, but couldn't. There was too much truth in that sentence. Her eyes weren't just sad, they were mirrors. And in that reflection, he saw not only his missing sister, but the child he once was. Scared, alone, breaking, inside. Later that day, in the car with Graham, Henrik told him everything. The necklace, the song, Ellie's words. Graham wrote it all down with surgical precision. "It might sound crazy," Henrik said, "but something tells me this girl is my sister's daughter." Graham didn't react right away. Then, very calmly, he asked, "What's your sister's full name?" "Anna Marie Voss," the detective typed quickly on his tablet. After a few seconds, he frowned. "There's a record of an Anna Marie Voss who applied for a passport 12 years ago under a different last name, Kendrell. No recent activity since." Henrik felt the blood drain from his face. "That's all." Graham nodded. "For now?" That night, Henrik returned to the park with a blanket and a small flashlight. Ellie accepted both without a word. Before falling asleep, she asked, "Why do you come see me every day?" Henrik took a moment to answer, "Because you remind me of someone I lost." She turned onto her side, hugging the teddy bear tighter. "Then maybe I came, so you wouldn't lose someone again." And with that, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. Henrik sat for hours watching her, tucked under the blanket, under the tree where raindrops still clung to the leaves. A child sleeping in the middle of the city, invisible to the world, yet now visibly bound to him by something that couldn't be undone. But what he didn't know was that the next morning, Ellie would be gone, and in her place, something would be left behind, something he had never wanted to face. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit like. The bench was empty. The tree where the blanket used to hang was clean, undisturbed. The teddy bear, always there, was gone. Henrik arrived before sunrise, heart pounding, breath uneven. He paced back and forth, scanning the ground like an archaeologist of tragedy. But there was nothing. No crumbs, no footprints, no clues. Ellie had vanished just like his sister had, as if the world had swallowed her whole and erased her existence. But then, near the Aite tree roots, something caught his eye. A white envelope folded, with his name written in shaky letters, Henrik. His hands started to sweat the moment he touched the paper. He opened it carefully, like defusing a bomb. Inside, just a few handwritten lines. "You were the first one who saw me, but I have to go. They're close. My mom told me to run if I ever felt afraid, and today I did." Henrik sat down on the ground, the note clenched in his hands, his heart trying to process what it meant. They're close? Who? What did she mean by run if I felt afraid? How could a child write something so full of quiet terror? The first wave was guilt. The second, urgency. He had to find Ellie. Now he called Graham, who answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "She's gone," Henrik said, straight to the point. "What do you mean?" "She left a note. She's scared. Someone's after her." Graham went into action immediately. He ordered a search of the area, requested access to security footage, flagged nearby hospitals and police stations. Henrik got into his car, driving toward the only clue Ellie had ever given about her mother. A house with blue steps across from a tree that sheds white leaves. It was vague, but it was all he had. It took 3 hours and more than 20 blocks of searching before he found a street where cherry trees dropped white petals like fake snow. In the middle of the block, a house with blue steps. Henrik jumped out of the car like a madman. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. A third time. Finally, an elderly woman opened, startled. "Do you have a child living here?" "A little girl named Ellie." The woman shook her head but pointed to the house next door. "That one's had people coming and going the last few days. I saw a woman with a little girl, yes, but I don't know her name." Henrik ran to the next door. It was slightly ajar. He hesitated, then stepped in. The living room was empty, smelled of mold and recent abandonment. On the floor, a broken plate and a headless doll. On the couch, a child's blanket with drawings of rabbits, and on the table, a black and white photo. He stepped closer. It was Anna, older, her face tired, her eyes still big but dulled. Beside her, a girl about 3 years old, wearing the same musical note necklace. Ellie. They were smiling, but the smile looked fake. A forced pose. As if they were trying to convince the world, or themselves, that everything was okay. Henrik picked up the photo carefully. His fingers trembled. The confirmation struck him like lightning. Ellie was Anna's daughter, and Anna was alive, but hiding, running, and now missing again. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note. "If anything happens, follow the sound. It always knows the way." Henrik closed his eyes. That phrase, it was one Anna used to say when they were kids, whenever she played the piano. "Sound is a map," she'd whisper. "Sound knows." Later that afternoon, Graham called with an update. "We tracked Anna's last cell signal, a motel in Fairbourne near the railroad line. She checked in under a false name, but we're sure it was her. The girl was seen with her." Henrik jumped in the car and drove like a man possessed. The motel was run down, its walls peeling, the neon sign flickering. The desk clerk, an apathetic teenager, recognized the photo. "Yeah, they stayed here 3 nights, left in the middle of the night." The woman looked nervous, kept talking to herself. The kid just stared. Henrik asked to see the room. He climbed the worn steps and walked in. The scent of recent disinfectant couldn't erase the traces of days spent hiding. On the bed, a handwritten sheet of music. At the top, a title, "Lullaby for Ellie." Henrik sat on the edge of the bed, holding the sheet like it was a piece of his sister's soul. The melody was simple, but it carried a sadness too heavy to bear. Right then he understood. Anna was trying to say something, asking for help, in the only way she knew he would understand. But what he didn't know yet was that following, that music would take him to a place far beyond control, a place of truths no one wanted to face. The melody still echoed in Henrik's mind as he left the motel room. The folded sheet in his coat pocket felt like it weighed a ton. This wasn't just a lullaby, it was a message, a code. As if Anna, even in hiding, had known one day he'd find her, or need to. Outside, the wind carried a dry scent of rust. A distant train whistle sounded like a warning. Graham was leaning against the car, arms crossed, his face tight with something Henrik couldn't quite name. He had the look of someone who knew this was no ordinary case. "Do you know this piece?" Henrik asked, handing him the sheet music. Graham examined it, then shook his head. "No, but I can send it to a friend at the conservatory. He can check if there's any kind of hidden structure." Henrik nodded, then looked around, the empty parking lot, the shuttered windows of neighboring rooms, the tension hanging in the air like static. Something had been wrong from the beginning. Anna wasn't just hiding from the past, she was running from someone. And that someone was still chasing her. Back in the car, Henrik accessed Fairborn's traffic surveillance system. His environmental company had clearance to urban monitoring networks, officially for environmental alerts. But Henrik always knew it could be used for more. He input the time frame and approximate route from the motel. A few minutes later, a vehicle popped up. An old black sedan with dark-tinted windows, plates obscured by mud. Inside, two figures. A woman driving, a child in the back seat. Henrik recognized Ellie's posture instantly, head resting against the window, just like she did on the park bench. The license plate was unreadable, but the route pointed northeast, toward the state border. Henrik's gut clenched. He knew what lay in that direction. An old decommissioned federal preserve. Now just empty land. And beyond that, an abandoned family property. The house where Anna was born. It had sat untouched for decades, but it was still in their name. The place where everything started. They drove for hours into the late afternoon. The sun was sinking behind thick clouds as they reached the dirt road that led to the property. The iron gate was broken, hanging by a rusted hinge. Overgrowth had swallowed the entrance, and far in the distance, past dead trees and fallen branches, the silhouette of the house, still standing, still waiting. Henrik got out first. Every step felt like diving into childhood. Every snap of a branch lit up another buried memory. The wooden porch was covered in leaves. The living room window still bore the cracked glass Anna had broken when she was 6, chasing a butterfly. He pushed the door slowly. The creak was exactly the same as 30 years ago. Graham entered right behind him, alert, his gun discreetly hidden under his jacket. The house was dusty, but not abandoned. There were signs of recent life. Footprints in the dirt, empty food containers, a folded blanket on the couch. Above the fireplace, a yellowed photograph of 2 children, Henrik and Anna, smiling in front of the very piano where everything began. That's when they heard the sound, a faint creak, like wood under pressure. Henrik followed it upstairs. Each step groaned beneath his weight. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar, and from inside came a melody, soft, weak, the same melody from the sheet. Henrik pushed the door open. There in the center of the old room stood the piano, and in front of it, sitting with her back straight and hands resting on the keys, Anna, older than he'd imagined. Her long hair grey at the ends, her face lined not just with age, but exile. Beside her, Ellie slept curled up on a quilt, teddy bear in her arms. Anna didn't turn around at first. She stayed still, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Her whole life. "Henrik," she said, still facing the piano. "You came." He stepped forward slowly, his chest collapsing with every movement. His eyes burned. "Why?" was all he could manage. She lowered her head, hands still resting on the piano. Then, with a calm that hurt to hear, she answered, "Because I saw what our father did, and running was the only way to save her." Henrik's blood turned cold. The weight of her words hit like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" She finally turned to face him. What they always tried to bury. What destroyed everything it touched. Graham entered behind Henrik, but Anna didn't flinch. She was steady, like someone who'd finally decided to speak the truth. But before Henrik could ask anything else, a gunshot rang out outside, and the house was plunged into a new kind of darkness. The sound tore through the night like a sentence. It wasn't just a shot, it was a breaking point. Henrik froze as the echo rippled through the trees, Anna's hand still resting on the piano. Her eyes locked on his like she already knew what was coming. Ellie stirred at the sound, eyes wide, but she didn't scream. Instead, she stood silently and walked to her mother, wrapping her arms around her waist. Graham pulled his weapon and rushed to the window, gently parting the dusty curtain with his fingertips. What he saw changed everything. 2 men, he said, armed, coming from the back, silent, professional. Henrik swallowed hard. His mind raced, but his breath stuck in his throat. He turned to Anna. "Who are they?" She didn't hesitate. "They're the same people who tried to silence me 20 years ago, when I tried to report what our father did." Henrik's world collapsed. He had spent years thinking his sister had just disappeared. Or worse, that she'd gone mad. He had never imagined she had vanished to protect them, and that there was something even darker behind it all. Henrik couldn't finish the sentence. Anna nodded slowly. He abused the girls at the shelter he helped fund. I found out by accident, in one of the office files. When I threatened to tell someone, he locked me up for 2 days, said no one would believe me. So I ran. But before I left, I stole the records. They've been hunting me ever since. Henrik stepped back like something inside him had shattered, completely, irreversibly. The man he'd spent his entire life trying to please, honor, emulate. The role model, the hero, was a monster. And everything Henrik had built, his success, his status, his discipline, stood on a rotten foundation. Outside, footsteps approached. Graham locked the door and shut off the lights. He pulled out his phone and hit the emergency tracking button. "Backup is coming," he said, "but it'll take time. We need to hold our position." Henrik looked at Ellie, still holding tight to her mother, her wide eyes fixed on him. She seemed to understand more than any child should. "Why didn't she ever know about me?" he asked, voice rough. Anna took a deep breath. "Because you were the one thing I wanted to protect, and telling you would have put a target on your back too." Henrik moved closer, kneeling before the daughter of his sister, before the child who might be all that remained of a broken bloodline. He gently took Ellie's hand. And there, silently, he cried. Not a cry of panic, but of collapse. The perfect life, the control, the awards, the billion-dollar contracts, none of it meant anything now. Graham approached. "They're going to try to breach. We need to get out through the back. Does the house have a basement?" Anna nodded. "Yes, and there's an exit through the rear, but it leads straight into the woods. Better than staying here." They moved quickly, footsteps above them growing louder. Henrik carried Ellie in his arms, trembling but steady. Anna followed close behind, Graham covering the rear with his weapon drawn. The basement smelled of damp wood and old secrets. Scattered across the floor, bits of old toys, a tin truck, an incomplete puzzle, one of Anna's childhood shoes. Henrik helped push aside the bookcase that concealed the passage. Behind it, a small hatch. Graham kicked it open. A narrow tunnel stretched into the earth like a dark womb. One by one they crawled inside. They moved in silence. Above, the muffled echo of footsteps, and then a loud crash, the front door being forced open. Dirt fell onto Henrik's shoulders. Ellie trembled against his chest, but didn't cry. Anna whispered the melody from the lullaby, as if it were a shield. And for a moment Henrik understood. The music wasn't just a song, it was a code, a memory. A reminder of who they were, and what they would never allow again. On the other side, the forest enveloped them like a living beast. Tall trees, thick shadows, the air sharp and cold. Graham led them down a trail of wet leaves to a clearing where the backup vehicle should have been waiting. But something was wrong. The car window was shattered, and there was blood on the front seat. Henrik turned to Graham, who had gone pale. "They got here first," Graham said quietly. "This isn't over." And what lay ahead wasn't just escape anymore. It was a reckoning. The blood on the car seat was still fresh when Henrik took 2 steps back, as if the night itself was trying to swallow him whole. The forest closed in around them, branches bending under the weight of dread. Graham opened the driver's door carefully, scanning with practiced eyes. The driver was gone. Only a trail of crimson droplets leading to the edge of the trees. The radio was on, static crackling. A phone lay on the dashboard, snapped in 2. Henrik clutched Ellie tighter, his heart pounding like it wanted to escape his chest. Anna said nothing. Her eyes weren't panicked, just weary. A weariness born from years of being hunted, of surviving. Graham slammed the door shut. "They didn't kill him right away. Someone survived. That's a message. They want us to know. They're watching. And that they're always one step ahead." Anna touched Henrik's shoulder. He turned to her and something shifted. For the first time, he didn't see her as a ghost from his trauma. He saw her as a woman who had carried the burden of silencer for everyone. She looked him in the eye, calm, steady. I don't want to run anymore, she said. Henrik paused, then nodded. Neither do I. They chose to follow the western trail, used by hunters, that would lead them to a rural road a few miles away. Graham led the way, weapon ready, senses sharp. Henrik followed, carrying Ellie. Anna came last, scanning everything like a wolf in her own territory. Halfway through, Ellie spoke. Why do they want my mom? Henrik stopped, looked at her. There was no fear in her voice anymore, only curiosity, because she knows the truth, and the truth can destroy powerful people. Ellie was quiet for a moment, then rested her head on his shoulder. I like your voice, she said. It sounds like hers when she sings. A knot rose in Henrik's throat. Anna walked in silence behind them, her eyes glassy. Can you sing too? Ellie asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. Not anymore. But once, I could. Ellie opened the small backpack she carried and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, the sheet music. The same one he'd found at the motel. She handed it to him like passing a flame. Mom wrote it for me, but I think it's for you too. Henrik took the paper with shaking hands. And there, on the trail, with wet leaves falling around them, like dead snow, he began to whistle the melody. Slowly, digging it out from deep inside. And then, almost without realizing, Anna began to sing. Her voice fragile at first, then stronger, like someone daring to exist again. Graham turned and watched them with quiet respect. He said nothing. He let it happen. And in that small explosion of music, in the middle of nowhere, something invisible was stitched between them, as if the old pain had finally found a language they all understood. When they reached the road, an old truck was approaching. Henrik ran to the middle of the lane, waving both arms. The driver pulled over, surprised, but agreed to help once he realized who Henrik Voss was. The nearest town was 30 minutes away. They climbed into the bed of the truck in a hurry. Anna and Ellie wrapped themselves in a borrowed blanket, holding each other close. Henrik sat with his back to the driver, staring at the road behind them, trying to understand what they were leaving behind. Then Anna spoke. I have the files. They're with someone I trust. If something happens, to me he knows what to do, but if you want, you could be the one to deliver them. Henrik didn't hesitate. I want to. She looked at him, and something in her gaze was both grateful and relieved, like she had finally passed the flame. I didn't want you to find out this way, she said. But maybe it was the only way. Henrik looked down at Ellie, now asleep against her mother's leg. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had known and done nothing. Anna closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was peace. Then maybe... Now we can stop. Running. The truck drove on in silence down the dark rural road. None of them knew what was waiting at the end. But for the first time in years, they knew where they were going. What none of them expected was who would be waiting for them on the other side. The truck came to a stop in front of a modest building, tucked between rolling hills and vineyards asleep for the season. It was an old wooden inn, long out of operation, but still maintained by one of Henrik's old friends, the kind of man who had vanished from the system by choice. His name was Arthur, and when he saw Henrik step down with a child in his arms and a woman who wore decades in her eyes, he didn't ask questions. He simply opened the door and nodded. No one's. Can I bother you here at least for a while? The room was small but warm. It smelled like firewood, and the creaking floor felt like the house was breathing. Henrik helped Anna to a chair. Ellie ran straight to the unlit fireplace, placing her teddy bear gently beside the cold embers. Arthur brought blankets and hot tea, then disappeared into the back, as if he had always belonged to silence. Henrik sat on the floor across from his sister. They looked at each other for minutes. No words, only the kind of gaze that siblings share, filled with years, scars, and unanswered questions. When you ran, he began, then stopped. The weight of it still hurt. Anna wrapped both hands around her mug, drawing strength from the heat. I thought about taking you with me, I swear I did, but you still believed in him, and I couldn't risk you turning me in without knowing. Henrik lowered his head. The pain of hearing, that was sharp. But the guilt of knowing she might have been right hurt even more. I would have, he admitted, shame heavy in his voice. I didn't know anything, but I wanted so badly to be like him, to be seen. Anna reached out, touching his hand gently. You were just a kid trying to survive, same as me. Silence again. Only the sound of the wind whistling through. The cracks in the wood. When Ellie was born, she continued, I thought maybe I could rebuild something, but they found us again, tried to buy my silence. Then they threatened us. So, we vanished for good. Henrik looked at her daughter, now asleep under 2 thick blankets, the teddy bear guarding her face. She's strong, she's all you. Anna smiled. For the first time, a real smile. No, she's what we could have been if they'd left us alone. Graham appeared, leaning in the doorway with a phone in hand. I got in touch with Anna's contact. He confirmed the files exist. Documents, videos, audio, solid material. Enough to take down a lot of people. Henrik stood. Then it's time to act. I agree, Graham replied. But we have to know who to trust. If we leak this to the wrong media outlet, it gets buried. If we go through the courts, it disappears. Anna rose slowly, her voice steady. There's a journalist. Her name's Liza Rowe. She's worked with trafficking survivors, exposed political rings protected by big corporations. She was nearly killed for it, but she never stopped. I trusted her once. She's the only one who can carry this forward. Henrik looked to Graham and nodded. Find her. Bring her here if it's safe. If not, set a meeting, but this story goes out. Not just for Ellie, for everyone who came before her. Later that night, Henrik stepped out onto the porch. The sky was clear, and the air, though cold, felt lighter. Anna joined him, both wrapped in blankets over their shoulders. They stood in silence for a long time, until she said, You want to know why I wrote that song? Henrik turned slowly. Always. She looked up at the stars, eyes full. Because in the dark, music was the only thing that reminded me who I was. I wrote that lullaby for her, but I wrote it for me too. To remember there was still a place where I was just a girl with a brother who knew how to smile. Henrik couldn't hold back the tears, not of pain, but of something older, a kind of ancestral recognition. As if that night sealed something time had tried to erase. I don't know if I can fix what happened, he said, but I can promise she won't grow up afraid. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder, the simplest and most necessary gesture. That's enough. Inside, Ellie slept like someone who had finally found solid ground. But outside, beyond the hills, forces were still moving. The men who hunted them hadn't disappeared. And now they knew. Henrik was in the game. And the next move would be theirs. The sound of the helicopter shattered the morning silence just before dawn, a sharp, circular thudding, like a siren with no melody. Henrik was the first to hear it. He rushed out of the makeshift kitchen, the radio still on. Journalist Liza Rowe's voice on the line waiting for instructions. The sky, once clear, was now sliced by beams of light from an aircraft with no visible markings. Graham burst from the bedroom seconds later, gun already in hand. They found us. Henrik sprinted to the room where Ellie slept. He scooped her into his arms without waking her, her body warm, limp with sleep. Anna was already at the door, backpack on her shoulders, the musical note necklace tucked beneath her coat collar. They didn't come to scare us, she said flatly. They came to finish what they started 20 years ago. Graham opened the side entrance, the emergency route through trees and ravines. Arthur, the old friend, emerged from the stable with 2 saddled horses. They've blocked the road. With their vehicle, he said, out of breath. The woods are your only shot. Anna mounted the first horse with the ease of someone who knew escape better than routine. Henrik handed Ellie to her, then climbed up behind them. Graham remained, on foot, pointing to the second horse. Go with them, I'll hold them off. Henrik hesitated. You can't do it alone. I don't need to win, I just need to stall. No more words. They vanished into the trees. The forest was a labyrinth of living shadows. Branches snapped beneath hooves. Ellie woke halfway through, startled, but Anna held her tight, whispering the same song in her ear. Henrik, pressed against his sister's back, guided the horse with instinct and fear. He knew they were being followed, knew they might not make it. But he kept going. The clearing appeared at the top of the valley after nearly 40 minutes of fleeing. According to Liza Rowe, an old telecom tower stood there, decommissioned but still strong enough to transmit files via satellite. Henrik jumped down and ran, Graham's laptop in hand. Anna stayed hidden among the rocks, cradling Ellie. The connection was weak, but all he needed was a signal. He inserted the memory card. Hundreds of folders, photos, videos, audio, signed statements, the organized rot of their father's empire, and the institutions that had protected it. Upload time 7 minutes. Henrik stared at every second like it might be his last. Come on, come on. A gunshot rang in the distance. Anna screamed his name. Henrik turned. A man stepped out from the trees. Tall, tactical gear, sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. He didn't speak, just raised his gun. Henrik raised his hands. You don't have to do this. The man didn't flinch. Another shot, but not from him. Graham limping in from the side of the hill, wounded, bleeding, but still on his feet. The man dropped with a dry grunt. Henrik ran to him, yanked the gun from his hand and looked down at the radio clipped to his vest. 2 more coming, Graham wheezed, kneeling on the ground. The upload's at 72%. Henrik ran back to the laptop. He typed furiously, boosting bandwidth, restarting frozen windows, doing everything he could to keep the connection alive. The screen stalled, refreshed. The clock dragged. Anna appeared beside him, Ellie in her arms. The girl stared at the sky with wide eyes, then without warning in she started to sing. The lullaby. The song from the sheet. There, in the middle of chaos. A child's voice cutting through the cold with a purity no violence could silence. Henrik cried while he typed. Anna cried without realizing, and Graham, bleeding, exhausted, unsmiled. The upload hit 99%, another gunshot. Henrik turned just in time to see another man go down. This time it was Arthur, rifle in hand, protecting them from a distance. 100%. The upload confirmation tone pinged on the screen. A message from Liza Rowe. Followed, received, backed up on secured servers. Be ready, it goes live in 30 minutes. Henrik dropped to his knees. The forest was no longer silent. Sirens howled in the distance. Helicopters were approaching. Federal agents, the real ones, were swarming the perimeter. Anna held Ellie like she was holding life itself. Henrik looked up at the sky sewer, and for the first time he felt something inside him had finally broken free. Is it over? Anna asked. No, he replied, rising slowly. It's just beginning. But what they still had to face was what would happen when the world found out the truth. The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the clink of coffee cups outside in the hallway couldn't break it. On the left side, 3 federal prosecutors pored over documents with the hardened expressions of people who knew they were about to unearth a nation's worth of silence. On the right, Henrik sat beside Anna. Their clothes were modest, but neither tried to hide who they were. Ellie sat in the back with Arthur, sketching in a worn notebook with colored pencils. 2 months had passed since the story broke. The exposé by Liza Rowe had spread across the globe in 3 languages, exploding on forums, headlines, and social media like a collective confession. It wasn't just Henrik's father who fell. It was an entire system, a system built to protect predators in suits and destroy those who dared to resist in silence. Anna's name, once buried in rumor and forgotten by design, was now painted on banners, echoed in speeches, and carried in candle-lit marches by hundreds of women. Henrik had never sought forgiveness or recognition. But as he looked at his sister, now steady, and at her daughter, a child who sang without fear and slept without shrinking into herself, he understood. Maybe there was such a thing as justice. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Shuni took a deep breath. Henrik squeezed her hand under the table, a small gesture, but one that held everything left unsaid for the last 30 years. In that courtroom, they weren't there for revenge. They were there for closure, to put a final period on the cycle that had turned them into shadows. During her testimony, Anna spoke with a steady voice, calm, unembellished. She told them what she saw, what she lived, what she survived. No dramatics. No exaggeration, just the truth. When she finished, the silence was louder than any applause. The judge called for a 10-minute recess. Henrik stepped into the hallway. Leaning against the cold marble wall, he closed his eyes. His body felt heavy, like every cell was finally relaxing after a lifetime on high alert. When he opened his eyes, Ellie was standing in front of him. "Are you leaving after this?" she asked, holding her notebook. He knelt, so they were eye level. "Only if you want me to." She hesitated, then held out the notebook. On the first page, she had drawn 3 figures holding hands: a woman, a man, and a little girl in a blue dress. "Mom said we can live in a place with big windows now," Henrik smiled. "I know one. The windows are so big the light still comes in, even when it's cloudy." "Does it have music?" He nodded. "There's a piano waiting to be played again." She thought for a moment. "Do you play?" Henrik looked down the hall as if seeing something far beyond time. "I'm learning again." Back in the courtroom, the judge announced that the material submitted was sufficient to open a formal investigation into 14 named individuals from the files. 4 were already in custody. 7 had left the country. The others would be summoned in the coming days. The case would move to federal court, with proceedings open to the press, in the public interest. Henrik looked at Anna. She was crying, silently, not from pain but from release. Outside, reporters waited like wolves at the gate. But Henrik said nothing. Anna said nothing. Only Ellie walked forward, letting go of her mother's hand. She climbed up on a small wooden crate in front of the crowd and said only, "My mum told the truth, now it's your turn to listen." Then stepped down calmly, like someone who knew the right words didn't have to be many. That night, in the house with the big windows Henrik had promised, the 3 of them sat at a restored piano. Anna played gently. Ellie sang along in a soft, unsure voice. And Henrik, without speaking, pressed the lower keys, rediscovering notes he hadn't touched in years. The song had no name. It was just theirs. And when it ended, none of them clapped. They just smiled, because they knew that at last the music of something that would never again be silence had begun. And for the first time in a very long time, the sound wasn't from the past. It was from what was still to come. Thanks for making it all the way here, but don't go just yet. Right there on your screen is another emotional story waiting for you. Click, subscribe, and share. I'll see you there.